Hi, Rebecca. Welcome to the Conscious 7 podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. We're so excited about today's conversation with you. As I said, it's going to be a little spicy.
Lovely.
So tell us about sexual alchemy.
We're going to jump right in, huh?
Yeah, what is sexual alchemy?
Yeah,
And tell us how you arrived at this place of promulgating sexual alchemy.
Gosh, where do I start? I'll give you a little bit of all of that, and then you can dig further if you like. I was exploring my own sexuality many years ago, doing some neo-tantra workshops and that sort of thing. And my teacher started sending me clients, and I, kind of knew what to do. And about 2 years later, she said, you need a website now. This is your work. This is your calling. This is what you're meant to be doing. And so when I first set up and as doing this work, I just went under my name, Rebecca Lowrie, but I was doing the ironing one day, and I'll have you know, I didn't do that very often, but my daughter had to wear a school uniform at the time and they had to be ironed. And I was listening, do you know Caroline Mace?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was listening to a webinar of hers, and she was talking about alchemy. And as she was talking about it, I was thinking, that's what I do. I just do it with sexuality. I said, and I thought to myself, I do sexual alchemy. And then I thought, oh, that's a cool term. And that's where the term came. I mean, the term actually exists out in the world, but I didn't know it at the time. That's where it came to me from, was listening to her and going, oh, that's what I do. And for me, alchemy traditionally is thought to be turning base metals into gold, turning lead into gold. And I feel like that may or may not have actually existed in the world. I don't know, but it was actually a cover for what was really going on. And what alchemy really is inner transformation. It's doing the inner work. It's turning your shadow into light, or owning your shadow, or transmuting and transforming that which doesn't work for you into something that does work for you. And so for me, obviously, then I do that in the sexual realm, intimacy, pleasure, connection, all that sort of thing. That's where it came from.
I found the way I learned about sex was by my own hand, right? And then the way that translates into partnerships and being with women is almost like a shared masturbation, right? Because that's how I learned it, because when I was growing up, it was not talked about.
Mm.
So
would it be true to say, though, that what you learned was what your body liked?
Yeah. So the whole thing of releasing tension and going to orgasm was it. That was it. There wasn't anything else. It was like,
and you could call that sex or not. Is that sex, or is that just releasing tension?
Well, exactly. Because obviously, as I've got older, the whole thing has changed, because as a man, and I know women want this as well, from my own experience, is having a deeper connection and having the flow of love. And I was telling Lauren that in ancient cultures in the East, like Asia and India, people understood the native sexual superiority of the feminine. So when a boy reached sexual maturity, they brought an older woman in who was an experienced woman, almost like a skilled initiator, who would initiate him into the art of truly ecstatic sexual loving, because her expertise was acknowledged and honored. So then that boy, 14 years of age, would then be with his partner and have a totally different experience to the kind of locker room experience that we're brought up with as men.
My belief actually is that everyone of every gender in historic ancient times learned the art of intimacy.
Right.
It wasn't just priestesses teaching boys. There were temples where people of different genders would then pass on the art of intimacy and lovemaking and connection and all of that to everyone of every gender.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Can you expand on that just a little bit more? That's very interesting.
So we learn about who we are as sexual beings in a lot of different ways. Sometimes that is with ourselves. As you said, Peter, we learn about what our body likes and how we like to be touched, and what friction we need to get to, or like a friction orgasm, that sort of thing. And then we learn other things by being with different partners. And I believe in ancient times, we weren't quite so heteronormative Like, we live in a world now where heteronormacy has become a structure that is in the world, but it isn't the true reality.
Can you explain that term for our listeners?
Heteronormacy is the structure that makes heterosexuality, air quotes, the norm. It isn't the norm. It is one way of expressing sexuality. There are some people who identify as a binary gender. So, for example, that could be male or female. And then they identify as sleeping with what they perceive to be the opposite of that. And then that system is programmed into us, and we're socialized to believe that that's the norm. And anything that deviates from that is a deviant, right? Mm-hmm. But that's wrong. That's bullshit. Mm-hmm. If you were able to accurately research every single 7 billion humans, gender and sexual preference, you would find that heterosexuality is not the norm.
So how do we start to trust the energies of our body? And how can we start to let go of that resistance? Because I get it, that sort of programming that we all have. And I think many of us, I didn't really trust the energies of my body because I only knew one energy. And that was it. So anything else, there was cognitive bias about it. Well, this is just the way it is. So how do we honor the ongoing play and pleasurable forces with each other? And I think that has to start with an element of trust and trusting those energies.
Well, I think it's really complex. I don't think that there's a simple answer to it. If, even if I were able to say, here's the formula, here's how you do it, even if that was possible, we're still doing that within the context of a world with all the old structures still in place. They're starting to dissolve a bit, they're starting to fall away, but we're still told this is the right way, this is the normal way. So to do anything outside of that takes courage first, and it takes ever evolving, deepening self-awareness, and I think commitment to your own truth. You need to not want to fit in necessarily, not necessarily need to belong. It's like you need to make your own truth more important, more valuable to you than the truth you're being sold or told to fit into.
Because don't you feel the truth ultimately comes out? It comes out by some act out, in trying to make your way back home to that truth, whatever that truth is. Well, but yet we are so conditioned. Would that be correct?
I think that's a big question, because I think for many people, especially younger people today, it's easier to follow that thread of truth. However, I think that what actually happens is that if you don't follow that truth, it gets squished out somehow anyway. And in a kind of darker area, a way of looking at that is, for example, the stuff that happens in the Catholic Church. If you're suppressing your sexuality, it's going to come out somewhere, right? And so if you are, say, naturally gay, but you're suppressing that because you're in a society or a family situation or whatever where it's not okay, it's going to come out somehow. You're going to either beat yourself up, you're going to internalize that homophobia and hatred, it leads to depression, anxiety, health issues, all kinds of horrible stuff. So the truth will out, yes, but whether it comes out in a healthy way or a dysfunctional way depends on many things. And so that's why I say it takes courage to swim against the tide. It takes courage to stand up and say, you're telling me I should be that, but that's not what I am. And so I feel like overall the human cohort is moving towards more liberation. But what you see, and very much in America, Lauren, here too, but more so there at the moment, is as there's this movement towards more liberation of being who we really are, the opposite side of that clamps down more. Don't say gay. If you know someone who is trans and you support them, you can go to jail. It makes me want to throw up, those things that are coming into play right now. I think that it's just as one thing grows bigger, the other side equalizes it somehow. And, eventually we have to get a critical mass going in the right direction.
I wholeheartedly agree. And being a mother of five, I've seen the growth in the system that we have here. And an example would be, my kids were at a school, my youngest daughter, and a father who's very conservative was having a conversation with me and disgusted, beyond disgusted, using profanity in his language of disgust about the topic of conversation at the lunch table was about what sexual drug, like the sex changes and what the drugs they are using, and they're gay and this one's doing that. He was beyond angry and pulled his daughter out of the school.
Oh my God.
So it's, but he also in the same context was coaching basketball. It is in the same vein here, is that all these girls are cutting themselves. They are traumatized. They don't know who they are. They are struggling emotionally. And, from that conversation, I felt, man, we've got to get to these girls and boys, because I know many boys as well, younger. And I know we mentioned earlier in a conversation about starting sex education, real education, not what, male, female, this is how you make a baby. No, it needs to go much deeper in exploring the truth of each individual's at a very young age. How do you feel about that?
I think it's getting more and more important that we do that. And interestingly, this topic keeps coming up in my world, which is interesting to me. I think that in an ideal world, we would teach children from the moment they're born about boundaries and consent, and about their bodily autonomy, and about their right to own and make decisions about their own body. Perhaps they need some help doing that till a certain age, but it's not for me to put my beliefs on my child or my way of doing things on my child. It's my way as a parent is to help my child make the best decision for themselves, right? And to learn that they can say no, and to learn that their body is their own to choose to do what they want with. And so those things I think should be taught immediately and over and over and over again, because how we relate to ourselves and each other is going to change, obviously, especially those early years. What we can do with that as toddlers is different to what we do between like 7 and 9, is different to when we become young teens and the hormones kick in, And so boundaries of consent and bodily autonomy in different ways for those ages would be awesome. And then things around pleasure. Kids know pleasure and sensuality. Babies put things in their mouth to get to know it, right? Mm-hmm. We're naturally sensual creatures. There's a big difference, of course, between pleasure and sensuality that is non-erotic, not sexual, and pleasure and sensuality that is. So if you think about non-erotic forms of that, standing outside with the sun on your face, swimming in a lake on a summer's day, that first bite of the first strawberry of summer, quite summer girls, you can tell all my things come, but those things that awaken our senses, bring them to life, but that are not necessarily erotic. We should be teaching children how to engage in that and enjoy it. And this is what hearing can do. And this is what your taste buds can do. And how amazing that is this beauty over here that you can see with your eyes, and how to engage with the senses. So they get to know and embrace pleasure for pleasure's sake. And then when they come into sexuality, they've already got that switched on, mm-hmm. and it overlaps. Mm-hmm. Like you said, sex education is don't get a disease, don't get pregnant. Mm-hmm. And heterosexual. Because here's the thing, I've been contemplating this a lot recently. What is sex? If we teach that sex is when a penis enters a vagina, we're back in that heteronormative structure, A, and B, then we're teaching, just even if you take all the heterosexual kids and you were telling them sex is when the penis enters the vagina, but you can go and do all the other things, that's all right. Mm-hmm. Is it or isn't it? What is sex? What are we teaching that sex is? And so there's this whole body of work that I feel could be done before we even get to sex education, mm-hmm. pleasure, and all that stuff. And then how do we overlap all those things we've been learning, boundaries and consent, bodily autonomy, pleasure, sensuality, all that? How do we take all of that into our sex lives. And already then they're going to have an expanded experience of sexuality and sensuality.
Mm-hmm.
That's the stuff I'm teaching adults, because
Wow.
they didn't get to learn it.
Well, exactly.
So,
well, I think it's also changing the narrative because there is the foundational aspect of it. But I know when you go to bachelor parties, there's this narrative of you're now being tied down, you're shackled. It's almost like there's this voluntary loss of freedom that you now have because you just got married. And there's this whole, the ball and chain, this whole narrative that goes on. And we need to change that narrative because it's not a loss of freedom. It should be an expression of freedom, as you're saying.
Yeah, and there's another aspect to that. And I've just had a really interesting conversation with someone about that, which is another structure that is starting to change, but is still very much in place, is the idea of couples. The idea that the only relationship structure available to us is two people forever. That's it. I mean, that's one way. There are many people who are, including myself, who are naturally monogamous. But how do you know you're monogamous if you don't try some other relationship forms? I was interviewing somebody for my podcast around different relationship structures. And I was saying, we're encouraged to try different kinds of food and different color clothing and go to different countries. We're encouraged to try all these different things to figure out who we are. But we're only given one relationship structure for 7 billion people. That doesn't seem right.
So are we designed, do you think, to be monogamous or polygamous?
Everyone's different. That's like saying, are we designed to be straight or gay or queer?
Right.
Or, male or female or non-binary or gender fluid. There's 7 billion of us. No one's the same like snowflakes, right? And so, everyone, and we're fluid. I think really if we were able to get rid of all the structures that are in place, we would all be much more fluid. There's times where you might be more straight and monogamous, and there are times where you might be more open and a little queer, and then like different things are happening in your life and different times. And I know labels are very important for some people because they're trying to be seen, and equally if we could just get rid of the labels and be true to who we are in each moment, that would be some liberation.
Yes, it would.
But it would take an awful lot of structures would have to fall away or change or dissolve for that to happen. But I think it's heading in that direction. We may not see it in our lifetime, though.
Well, it brings up the whole subject of free will as well, because I think that the interference that we have through all the programming and the conditioning and the narrative and the placards and the advertising interferes with that free will, so that instead of us being available and open and present with an open heart and trusting your body, getting to know and exploring your body, we're so detached from that because we believe there's one relationship structure. So in terms of alchemy, coming from the male perspective, if you were going to work with me, what would be the first port of call?
Well, first I would ask you what you wanted to work on. What did you want to explore, learn, expand? I'd need to know what were your intentions, what were your needs, what's going on for you, because there's no one size fits all, as it were.
Right.
I can give you some examples of the men that I'm currently working with.
That'd be great.
And interestingly to me, anyway, I've seen quite a shift as we were on the other side of lockdown. I can't really say the other side of pandemic because who knows, but as we're on the other side of lockdown, I've seen a shift in what men are asking for or coming to me for. So pre all of this, I was seeing a lot of men who, like my bread and butter stuff was men with erection issues, wanting to last longer in bed, little to no experience or no recent experience, or knowing that there was something more than they were experiencing, but not knowing how to get there. Those were my kind of bread and butter things. Now, what I'm seeing, and it makes me quite emotional, is a lot of men who have been on their own for these last 2 years, who whether that's because they were already single or they split up during the pandemic or they live on their own or whatever it is, who are touch deprived, who are, even putting sexuality out of it, they haven't had a hug for 2 years or more, and I'm getting a lot of guys who want to come and just be held, be stroked and kind of have some loving energy put in. There's a lot of guys who, like before, who have little to no experience or no recent experience and are just considering getting back out there, starting to date again. But because they haven't been doing any of that for 2 years, they've either lost their mojo, lost their confidence, not sure who they are as sexual beings anymore. There's also another group of men who have spent the last 2 years going, I want to learn more, about who I am. And so maybe they've done some personal development work, but haven't addressed the sexual part of that. And they're ready to jump in. So there's probably a few others I can't think of off the top of my head, but that's kind of what I'm seeing at the moment. And interestingly also is pre-pandemic, I was doing programs. So people would come and they might do an introductory session and then they would sign up for a program so we could dive deep because, it's like I always say, if you want mastery over something, if you want to play the clarinet as a master, you can't just play it once. It takes repetition and commitment and all of that. But I'm not feeling like my guys they're wanting to commit to the journey, but not in the way that I did it before. It's like they want to come and test the water, go away for a bit and let that integrate. And then they'll come back and do the next bit. And it doesn't have the flow that it had before. It's a different flow. It hasn't settled yet, I guess, because COVID's still around and people haven't quite found their new way of being yet. And so that the flow and rhythm and pace hasn't settled yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because I think sexual energy is a strong force, but it also takes a lot of strength to redirect that energy, or to suppress that energy. Because I think it is a spiritual force. Sometimes, and Lauren and I were speaking about this some time ago, and one of the things that I was saying, I said, I don't think we're adult enough to have sex. Because to my mind, sexual energy is a way of transmuting that into spiritual energy. And that's the kind of way I feel it. So there isn't a me and you in it. There is that union, that melding together, that force that joins. When you're separate, there's a me and you. But when you're together and you're together in that union, I'm not just talking about straightforward sex, but when you have that union together, there isn't a me and you. There is this sort of energy that rather than that energy being depleted afterwards, you actually feel energized by it.
You are the fountain of that energy. It is present with you always. And that is how you engage with life.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's not a beginning, middle, and end. There might be a bit beginning, middle, and end to a physical expression of it, but there doesn't have to be. Mm-hmm. And that union that you're talking about, it can be physical, and it can be with one or more people, or it can be with yourself, and it can be with the sun, and it can be with a tree. It doesn't have to be other for you to touch that oneness.
Mm-hmm.
And you can use your sexual energy as the fuel to get you there.
Mm-hmm. Well, as an amateur photographer, when I go out and I'm taking images, I look at those images, I find it quite a sensual and a sexual. It's not in terms of I'm making love to the photo, but it's like a gateway to something. There's an essence in there. There's the whole ceremonic value of composition and taking in that landscape. And I'm struggling to put it into words, but there is a kind of sensuality for me in photography. That's why I love doing it. That's one of the reasons I love doing it. And I never came to that at first. It's just like, hey, I just want to shoot models. And I did all of that. Again, it's that union. If I'm out with my camera, my tripod on my own with a landscape, and it's like I'm now communing with nature, and there's that union, that feeling that it's not, there's a landscape, there's me, there's my camera. Mm-hmm. No. they all blend together.
You know, that's interesting,
for me,
Peter. Oh.
Go on. I was gonna say, for me, what you're describing sounds like presence. You know, when you're utterly present in the moment, and you can be present, and you can also be presence itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a subtle, enormous shift. When you're fully present with your camera, with the thing that you're shooting, with any, you know, whatever you're doing, even if you're fully present doing the washing up, it can be an ecstatic experience. It's joyful, or even crying can be an ecstatic experience if you're fully present in it. You're fully surrendered to it, you know? And then you become presence itself. And that is the union with oneness that you can experience with or without somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Interesting on the photography session. So flip it to the other side. I was having a photo shoot one time, and this photographer was just absolutely amazing. And he had to stop me, and he said, "Lauren, let me give you a lesson. You need to make love to the camera. You need to make love to the lens." And he was using that language. And I can tell you, it softened me. And I literally it was that moment of just, and he showed me, you know, examples of models and how they are making love to the lens and how it softens their eyes. And you can just see it. And I went, oh my goodness, I can see it. So that has forever changed me in front of the camera, because I will always think of Jonathan was his name. And so, Peter, yeah, you can make love to whatever that image is, whether it's a leaf, whether it is an animal, whether it is the female, but the other party is making love as well, who is looking in the lens, whether it is, another woman, or it could be an animal, but you can see it. You see it in the imagery, that essence of making love. It's beautiful.
I can go to the same place and it's fresh every time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same. I try and do that in my relationships. So I'm not seeing that person from my last reference point. Oh, there's Lauren, there's Rebecca. It's fresh every time, because I think there is a divinity and a life force in sexual energy and sexual alchemy. And there has to be about respecting oneself, but as well as not only learning how to give, but how to receive as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of the time we have this contrived debt whereby it's a bit like somebody gives you a compliment and then you overcompensate. Go, no, it's okay. No. You try and overcompensate by trying to repay them with something. I just had a neighbor come over and help me cutting down some of the trees before we got on the call, because we had a storm. And I immediately said to him, you know, he said, I'm just doing the neighborly thing. And he said, look, you're not obliged to pay me anything. I just like to give. And so, but I didn't receive it like that. And then once I received it, I thought, wow, there wasn't him and me. It was just this amazing energy that came together where the call and response was happening, and it just melded together. And there was a completion to that. There was a satisfactory completion to that.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than me thinking, oh, I've got to, you know, give it, you know, this kind of law of reciprocity. I've got to give something back. I can't just take it for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole psychological thing. But so
you also say that you were giving him the opportunity to help.
Right.
And
right.
I don't know if you know the work of Betty Martin. She is awesome. So Betty, her body of work is called The Wheel of Consent, and she's got a school of consent, and she's also recently come out with a book called The Art of Receiving and Giving. And her wheel of consent, if you look at the wheel, there's giving and receiving, and then there's allowing and taking. And then there's nuances within all of them. And the core foundation of it is, who is it for? So if I say to you, Peter, can I come over and pick an apple off your tree? You are giving me an apple off your tree. Or are you allowing me to take an apple off your tree? Really, you're allowing me.
Yeah.
If you were to pick a bunch of apples and say, here, Rebecca, this is a gift, that's you giving me the apples and I'm receiving the apples.
Right.
If I say, I would like to come and get an apple off your tree, that's you allowing me to take an apple.
Right.
And so, and it gets, you can see it gets really, you can really get into that with sexuality. But the bottom line is, who is it for? It might be for both of you, but there's a fundamental who it's for underneath it. And then you can get some real sexy things going with that, because you can practice with a partner. And this is one of Betty's things, actually. And then she took it from somebody else whose name I can't remember, but the 3-minute game. And for 3 minutes, you ask each other 2 questions. So I would ask you, what would you like me to do to you for 3 minutes? The second question is, what would you like to do to me for 3 minutes? Right. And then you ask the questions. And so there's 4 rounds. 2 are for me and 2 are for you. But the doing goes both ways, right? So we get taught that the doing person is the giver. That's not always the case. Doing person might be doing the thing I asked for, and so it's for me, and I'm receiving it.
Right.
You know, so when you start to play with all those nuances, you can get some real juicy fun.
Yeah, I think that's, I love that. But I think that's something that's been really the whole issue of play, you know, and being grown up, and we unconsciously engage in that act without any real presence.
Totally.
Because go on, yes.
We do that unconsciously all the time, and we are not clear in our intentions. So, for example, you know, a partner might say to their partner, "Can I give you a back massage?" And the partner says yes. So they're doing a back massage, but what they can feel energetically is, it feels like you're coming on to me. I thought you just wanted to give me a back massage. Now, if the one doing the back massage really wanted to give a back massage, they wouldn't be picking up some other energy. But if their intention was, I'm going to give you a back massage so you'll relax so I can come on to you, that's going to be felt. And then you're not giving the thing you offered. Right.
Well, it's also interesting how touch, you know, the way you touch somebody, you know, because you can touch, you can caress, and the nervous system registers it in a very, very different way. And that also depends on your programming and the imagery you have in your head as well.
And the intention in both of you. So one of the things, I haven't taught it for a while, but one of the things I used to teach was the art of conscious touch. And so when you're touching somebody, what you're holding energetically is going to be transferred to that person. And that person may or may not actively receive it. So when I teach it, if I'm going to be the person offering touch first, then I'll get someone to reveal, you know, a bit of arm, skin, or somewhere they're happy to be touched, preferably on the skin. And I'll start with a neutral touch. And my touch will be, so I tell them, this one's experimental. So I put the flavor, the vibration of this is experimental safe touch in my hand. I place it on them, and I let their awareness come and meet my touch. And then we move it slowly, and they get the flavor of that. And then we agree on what the next flavors will be. And so I tend to use healing, you know, sexy, something sexy, I want you kind of thing, and loving, because those are all quite 3 different ones. There's loads of others, but those are 3 good contrasting ones. So I will infuse my hand with that thing, place it on their body, they come up to meet me, and I move. And every single one of them can pick out which energy it is. And what's really fascinating is then whichever way you were doing it, whether they're giving me the touch or I'm giving them the touch, there's a difference also if the receiver is actively receiving or not. Because someone can be touching you and you're reading something over here, or you're looking at the television, or, you know, you're not there, and that's okay. It's not bad. You know, my partner's stroking my back, whether I'm paying attention or not, it's nice. But if I take my mind's eye or my attention and awareness where his hand is, that is hot for both of us. And it's more hot for both of us because he feels me meet him there in that touch.
That's
I can
beautiful.
tell you how we discovered that if you want. It's a little fruity.
Well, then please share.
This was many years ago when we first got together, and he was going down on me, doing the good stuff. And after a few minutes, he said, "Where are you?" And I was like, "I'm up here, babe, enjoying this." And he was like, "Yeah, but I'm down here." And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Can you come down here with me, please?" And so I took my awareness down my body and down to where he was and met him there. And it changed everything.
Yeah.
It was fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And then, so that's one, just meeting there, just following wherever they're touching you is awesome. And then you can put in intentions. So sometimes when we're doing things, however we're doing them, whatever parts of the body we're using, then we'll also create an intention. And quite often it's the intention that puts me over the top. Mm-hmm. Because we, and there's a whole lot of sex magic in that and stuff as well. So, we're such complex, nuanced beings. And the more consciously we bring every aspect of ourselves to anything, whether it's photography or walking down the lane or making love, the more gorgeous, delicious yumminess there is in it, the more life there is in it, the more, the more we're meeting it fully. And that's what's ecstatic.
Yes. As you were speaking, that, it takes me back to my personal training. As a trainer, we had a whole, series of education on how you touch, right? And just the big one was you never creepy touch. So you don't go in with pointing your finger and doing that and creepy touch. You either go all in or you stand back. You learn the language of first acceptance of touch. And so I always, because I'm a hands-on, I love touch, I will always ask a client, "Are you okay if I touch you? That is how I help you move your body." And so that immediately helps to start the dialogue. And I don't think I've ever had anyone say, "No, I'm not comfortable with that," because it is the touch, as you were describing it, as coming from me and meeting that body, wherever it is in the positioning of, of that exercise or movement. And the beauty of it is, Peter, you've heard me say it all the time, and you've experienced it in your practice, you've shared with me, is that when a client leaves and goes, "Oh my gosh, I feel so amazing," it was almost as if it was as erotic as the story that you just shared, which was just beautiful. You can apply that into, the work that we do as movement practitioners. And it's just lovely. And that is what gives me the greatest joy when someone does, you just see their whole body just soften. And it is orgasmic.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when I used to do a lot of massage, and a lot of my clients were women. And it was, I'd always say, you can have a towel or you can just go naked. It's totally up to you. I have no problem with either. And most of them would just go naked, no problem. Obviously, we had a level of trust. But what I found was that they felt, and this is based on a couple of ladies telling me this, was that after the massage, they said, "The way you massaged me or the way you touched me, I've never felt that before." So I would say to them, do you feel that your sexual gift lacks expression? Or is it that you're not having enough with your partner, or, whatever it might be? And what they found was that it was more with their partner, it became more mechanical. And as time went on, there was less interest in the exploration, in the play, in the pleasure. And without blowing my own trumpet, but I was very good at what I did. And most women who came to me said to me, "I feel like I've just levitated off the table." And you could see their face softened. They were radiant. And all of a sudden, their whole aura expanded because they started to let go. And again, it's the same thing. For me, again, there wasn't a person on the table and me. It was a union. Even though there wasn't penetration or anything like that, there was just a union there. Mm-hmm. of the connection and the exploration, because what I found was that women have more places to explore than a man does. I know you'll say no to that.
I know you'll say no to that. And I was disagreeing earlier when you said that.
But in terms of when you look at it physiologically, that's kind of what, from a male perspective, I thought, well, there's much more to explore in a woman than there is on a man. Because
it's interesting, though, that you've been taught that somehow, isn't it?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
You know, and then that becomes your own jailer, where you don't even try to explore outside of it.
No.
I know. Unless like you have started to question what you've been taught.
Well, I questioned that a long time ago, but it's this sexual polarity that starts to happen. And my thought at the time was, well, hey, there's a greater proportion of excitable flesh here and emotional responsiveness that exceeds what I have as a man, right? Because was my belief at the time, whereas trying to explore my own body and my own needs. And again, this is what I feel is about honoring your own body, is asking for what you need, as you were alluding to with that exercise. Mm-hmm. What would you like me to do to you for 3 minutes?
Yeah.
But we don't do that.
We don't do that. And, you know, like if I did work with couples, I don't, but if I did, I would tell them to once a week, sit down and play that game. It will take you 15 minutes, 3 minutes twice is 12 minutes, and the other 3 minutes just to set it up and finish it. 15 minutes, play that game, your sex life will be better. Mm-hmm. And your communication will be better, and everything else will, you'll know each other better, you'll know yourself better, and play it outside of your sexual expression. I mean, you could also do it with your sexual expression, but play it with, we're going to play it not as a lead on to sex. We're going to play it as curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Learn more about ourselves, and we can transfer that into sex if we want to later, another time.
So that is an immediate, activity that our listeners can go out and do today. Exactly.
Yeah.
Can I speak to something you were saying earlier? So you were saying about, being whatever it is, socialized, conditioned, somehow you pick it up in the cultural psyche, that your belief was, that women had more places that were possible to be erotic than men. I, a few years ago, worked with a chap who was paralyzed from the chest down, could not feel anything, and hadn't had any sexual expression. And I told him we were going to find his orgasm. He thought it was nuts. He could literally only feel anything from here up. And I said, we'll do it with touch, and we'll do it without touch. And he was like, so first was touch. And so with his consent, I explored his body where he could feel with different kinds of touch. Sometimes it was very soft and tender. Sometimes it was tapping. Sometimes it was scratching. We did all kinds of different kinds of touch. And he found parts just at the top of his chest. And I want to say on his back, but I can't remember, but the top of his back, where if I moved in a certain way, he could find an orgasm.
Wow.
Now, this wasn't a penis orgasm,
mm-hmm.
but it was orgasmic. Mm-hmm. He felt, that kind of...
that ripple.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
But you could also have a breath and energy orgasm. And that's something that I learned from Barbara Carellis, one of my teachers. I don't know where she learned it from, but it's a tantric thing. So you can, and she actually, it's a great story. She went on some show in America called something like Strange Sex or Weird Sex or something. And they put her in an MRI machine to have a breath and energy orgasm so they could see what happened in the brain. Mm-hmm. And what she did, so normally you would move your body, so you breathe in certain ways to move sexual energy through your body, and you move it up and up and up and up, and all this sort of whole lot of training for that. But then you start orgasming, your body starts gasming. And she had to do it in an MRI machine without the movement, which makes it harder. And she has a phobia of MRI machines. So it was a whole big deal, really big deal. But anyway, she did it. And sure enough, the pleasure centers of the brain light up. with the breath and energy orgasm. So I taught this chap the breath and energy orgasm as well. And he was able then to access at that point 2 kinds of orgasms.
What a healing.
Oh,
There's
seriously.
so much more that your body can do, anyone's body, whatever you're socialized as gender, than we are taught.
So you're working mainly with men, is that the main thrust? So
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, over my whole career, I've worked with every gender. I worked with women and non-binary and trans people and everybody. And then my teacher's like, you have to niche. And I didn't want to. And then I did some, soul searching, like who am I really serving well? And the truth is, with women, I overprotect. Like they tell me their issues and I go, yeah, I kind of collude and get in there with, that's no good. That doesn't help. It doesn't help. It's not good. And with couples, I just cannot do couples because I usually want to kind of steam in there, go, what the fuck are you on about? Like, no, I'm not really good with couples. I can't hold that dynamic well. But with men, I just can call it like I see it in a way that is straightforward, but gentle enough that they'll receive it, and it's interesting because I think this was maybe around the first lockdown. I wanted to be working and I was doing some Zoom clients, but I wasn't doing a lot more. My mentor, who taught me a lot of the energy work that I do, said, why don't you do not an activation, what does she call it? I can't think of the word. It'll come in a minute. But so basically I put out on Facebook that at whatever time, 7:00, I was going to put out sexual energy to anyone who signed up and like an attunement that they could feel it and let it awaken their system or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a better word, but I couldn't think what it was. She was all excited. She's like, I'm going to join you. I can't wait. And so I did, this whole ritual came out or whatever. And she got in touch afterwards. She said, you really were built to work with men. I was like, what do you mean? She said, well, I joined in. She said, but what was coming out of you was it was to meet masculine energy. And she said, I could let it meet the masculine in me, but it didn't meet the rest of me. I was like, yeah. She said, you were just put here to work with men. I was like, okay, then. And so, that's my sweet spot. And it could be cisgendered men who were assigned male at birth and identify with that. It can be trans men who were assigned differently at birth, but are men and are living at that. My energy will still, it's all the same to me.
So who is Rebecca being when you're in this process?
Interesting way to put that might be Rebecca's not there. Rebecca's not there. Rebecca gets out of the way because Rebecca is, the collection of personality traits that I've picked up over 56 years that gets switched on like a computer program in the morning. And it's who I believe myself to be, but that's mostly not true, And what's fascinating is, when I'm in a session, I welcome somebody in, we sit down, we start to have a chat. And I almost feel like Rebecca gets shoved out the way and something else comes through. We call her the sexual alchemist because it's separate, it's different. And the energy changes in the room. And it's interesting, there was a time where I was quite poorly with some adrenal thyroid issues and I was almost bedridden, but I could get out of bed, answer the door to a client and something would come through. And magic would happen and I could work with their energy and reroute energy and have these mad sensual sexual healing things happen. And I'd lock the door and I'd slump onto the floor.
Wow.
Right.
Just mad, or like this week, I've been having a bit of hay fever. Only had that recently and it's very annoying. And then yesterday I had a client and before he arrived, I was a bit sniffly and thinking, oh my God, in this day and age, you're not supposed to be sniffly. I know it's hay fever. I've done my test. And he arrived, nothing. I was like fresh as a daisy. We did this mystical, magical work. It was awesome. As soon as I waved him off, I was like sniffing again. So something else comes through and does the work. And I do my very best to get the hell out of the way.
So it's almost like you become a terminal point as an agency to amplify that energy because you've been working with it for so long. What would you say? Because I'm really interested in this aspect of surrender, because that's something I've always battled with. I remember when I did mine for 3 years, you had 5 people, you lay on the floor, one person took a foot, another foot, arm and the head, and they moved your body around.
I've done that in a neo-tantra course. A neo-tantra course, yeah.
And it's like the control was absolutely massive, right? And I wanted to let go. I really wanted to let go, but something in me just couldn't surrender. There was this control issue. I had to control these people moving my body around. It's not like I disliked it. There wasn't any of that, but I was just, and I got curious. I had this collaborative curiosity with myself. What's that about?
Mm-hmm.
What is real surrender? Because I know in that union, whether I'm doing a landscape or in a sexual union, there is that surrender, because there isn't me. There is just that energy coming together. So could you speak to that? Because I'm pretty sure that for many men, surrender is an issue.
So that's a multifaceted issue. The top two things that are coming to me as you're speaking that, one is safety. So when you're out with your camera and you're taking pictures, you probably feel safe doing that. You feel safe with your camera, you know the environment somewhat, you feel safe in the environment. And so you're able to let go and surrender a little bit and let something take over, grace or whatever it is, take over. And in your sexual expression, when you're with somebody, perhaps because you've been sexual for a while, or maybe you're in a relationship where you feel safe, there's an aspect of safety. In a situation where 5 people have hold of your head and your arms and your legs, that's unknown. There's more than one person to compute at a time. And we're very much taught to keep control of our bodies. Like when I was training in massage and I was learning, if you have somebody on their back and you are holding their arm and you tell them to let go, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
They will hold their arm up for you. They will not surrender it for you to hold. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot because we're forever holding we're told to sit up straight and walk straight and do all. So we're holding ourselves. We're kind of armored, in fact. And so that's part of it. There's a physical surrender that we are almost taught not to do. Mm-hmm. And then there's an ego surrender as well. The ego does not want to surrender. It is fighting to keep who you think you are in play. It doesn't want to go. And boy, it will fight things off. And there's a lot of talk in spiritual circles that, the ego is bad. The ego is not bad. It's what helps tether us to being human.
Yeah.
And even people who are awakened have ego, mm-hmm. right? Like they're still functioning in a human world. I think if we totally let go of ego, then we don't need to be in the body anymore. And I think, and that's what the ego tells us will happen. Well, if you let go of me, we won't be me anymore.
Right.
It fears obliteration and annihilation. So it's something that I think we have to do in bits and pieces and micro steps. And like with my work, you will laugh at this. I will laugh at this. When I first started doing the work, I would have a conversation with somebody who wanted to come along either by email or phone. And we'd talk about what he wanted. So say, he wanted to get and maintain better erections. And I would talk to him about what had happened in the past, and how long had this been going on for. And then before he came, I would make a plan of what we were going to do and how we were going to start here. And we we're going to do this for half an hour and then for an hour, whatever it was. And I would have it on paper, printed out in the room. And then after a while, I was like, I don't always need to do what's on that paper. So I would print it out, but hide it in the room just in case I blanked out, or something like I didn't know what to do. Now I couldn't possibly know what was going to happen in advance because now I sit and I get present with someone and we see what happens.
Yeah.
Because now the ego in that area isn't there. Mm-hmm. Plenty of ego in plenty of other areas. Right. But when I'm in that room, I am absolutely in service to the highest good of that person in front of me. And it's safe for me now. And it's my calling. So it's also safe in that way. I'm not on the wrong path. So it's okay to let go. And absolute magic happens because grace comes in. I'm sure the best photos you take, Peter, are when that which is Peter is out of the way and grace comes through.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the safety thing is right, because I know that to receive love or be loved, or give love, you need safety first. And I found over time in that mime course was that over time, when I did surrender, it was amazing. It reminded me of the lady on the table. That's how I felt. I felt like, wow, that it was just an incredible feeling when I just actually let go and I surrendered. And you remember, Lauren, we were talking about the juggling balls, and just a quick story was that I met this two Irish guys, tall, red, blazing, fiery red hair, who were going to teach me martial arts. But it was an ancient martial art I'd never heard of. So they said, meet me on the side, meet me on the pavement here at 5 o'clock. And I thought, well, that's weird. Anyway, I met them. They picked me up in their car and took me to this park and gave me 3 juggling balls. I'm like, what? This isn't martial arts. So I started to juggle. They wanted me to juggle, and I could do it quite well, but not great. And I was running after the ball, trying to keep it all in play. And he said, what I want you to do is let it go. Stop trying to hold on to everything, because when you start training, you need to be able to let go, not hold on. And it was such a potent lesson for me that when you actually surrender to it and you get into that flow, because there's no need to control, there's no need to hold on. Because I was literally chasing the ball, chasing the juggling ball, trying to keep it in play. And then when I dropped it and let it go, it was like, an out breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. It felt incredible. And then what did that look like in the art? It looked like that, like he would say to me, if you're holding on to my wrist, that's all you're controlling. You're not controlling the rest of my body because it's fluid. But you're so focused on this. So all my power and energy was going into that wrist. Whereas for him, he was relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
And the more relaxed he was, the more I tried to put strength on it. And the more relaxed he was, I wasn't controlling his body. So he could move his body and I couldn't hold on for dear life. And I have to say, I'm pretty strong.
Mm-hmm.
So it was that whole thing of surrender as a man, of letting go and being open, for me was a really important lesson. And I think even in the communion of intimacy, this surrender for me is really, really important in order to allow, like when you go to your client and you're feeling lousy and all of a sudden, boom, this energy comes through you. And then once it's over, you go back to where you were.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like something in you has to surrender to that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you've touched on something I think is really important too, which is if I'm with a lover who thinks that they have to control things or do some pre-described thing or pre-prescribed thing or perform like the gender that they think that they are, or what, any of that stuff, then they're not being present.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If they are fully present, then what happens is you're both surrendered to that moment, and then magic occurs. But if my lover isn't surrendered, then I'm not going to have as good a time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, similarly to, whether it's body massage, whether it's, movement practice, I mean, it's always in the act of surrenderment. The surrendering is where that enlightenment that you see every single time. I've experienced it, but maybe it's also the energy of the other. I've had many massages and I go, didn't quite get that. And they were the ones tapping me. Let go. And I couldn't let go for the reason that the energy was off. But I have been in the most orgasmic, the one that I've never, ever will forget was in Italy in the pool, a pool massage. Had never had one, but this guy took me to a planet that I have never been to. And I walked out of there and I was the host of the retreat. And my guests were sitting all in the waiting area. And I walk out. And I literally was somewhere and I'll never forget, one of them asked, she was like, are you okay? What, like, are you? And I said, that was the most, she went and signed up for it. It was almost like the When Harry Met Sally moment, it was like, I think I came out and I was exuding, probably, who knows if I was even saying something, I don't know, but Yeah, it really is both parties having to be fully present for that act of intimacy and whatever that act is to occur. And then it's guys, and then it's a beautiful thing.
You know, you've just reminded me of something. Many years ago, I was at a festival we have over here called Buddha Field. It's a really lovely family festival, no drink, no drugs. You don't have to be Buddhist to go, but it's run by Buddhists. And there was a sauna tent where there's this big like marquee thing, and there was a sauna. And then outside the sauna was a circle of cushions where people would go either before or after their sauna and drink chai and tea and whatever. And then in the middle of the circle was the guy who ran the sauna. He was this huge, like 6'5", you know, really giant guy that would give massages to somebody in the middle of the circle. And I came out of the sauna, you know, off my face a bit from the sauna and hot and whatever, and kind of plunked down. And this guy was giving a massage to another man. And I started watching, and what was like ecstatically beautiful was that they were both utterly present and utterly surrendered. That guy giving the massage was nowhere else but in that massage, even though there were people buzzing around and coming and going. And the guy receiving it was flopped. He had his head in his lap, and he was just like, and he turned his head at one point, the guy receiving, and opened his eyes and looked at me. And I looked at him, and I think we both came. You know, it was just like I had bear witness to him in his deepest surrender and was utterly there with him. You know, it was remarkable. I'd never experienced anything like it in my life. It was stunning.
Wow.
Gosh, that's incredible. And I think we are so ignorant about our senses and the capability of our senses and how we can get in touch with those senses and what they can do with us, what they can actually do when we actually instruct them. And we don't have the owner's manual, but we have exploration, and we have a faculty, and we have free will, unless it's interfered with. But one of the things I'm very keen to talk to you about as well is about shame and guilt, because shame and guilt is what I see is where you need to have better resources about what is causing that. But it's more about the shame and guilt of one's own body. Like for me, I used to have, because I'm not this kind of Coco Chanel sort of image, body image, you know, sort of model image. And I've got a big chest, and I used to get really self-conscious about that rather than being conscious of self, right? So then I would never take my shirt off. I would never take my shirt off at school. Plus I was asthmatic, and I had real shame about my body. I had real shame about silly things that, whereas today I don't really mind, but I still have an element of it. There's still that ghost that sits in the back and kind of whispers in your ear and goes, what are people thinking of you? Well, what am I thinking of me? And why? And I think many people, men and women, have this sort of shame about their bodies. I think there's a term called body shaming. And I wonder about that, because when you start to explore and express your sexuality, how does that impact you?
Yeah, that's a massive question. You know, it kind of takes us back to where we started, which is about the systems that are in play in our culture and our societies.
Right.
You know, we're taught that there's a right body to have. There's a right shape and a right size and a right weight and a right skin color, and that your body itself should be a certain way, and your thighs should be a certain way, and your belly should be a certain way, and your breasts and your penis and all of it. There's a right way, which is, of course, bullshit. We're like snowflakes. We're all different, and one way is not better than another. Yeah. You know, we even live in a world that says that there's a normal way to think and there's a divergent way to think. There's a able body and then there's disabled. In a society where we're calling someone disabled is because we've set up society to work for people like you and me. It's because the structures are broken. There's not a right way or wrong way to have a body. But of course, we are taught that there is. You know, we should be able to walk on our own 2 feet and see with our eyes and hear with our ears and not be fat and have boobs that are big enough, but not too big, but not too small. And the penis is just the right size, but not too big, but not too small. And like, you know, some men and even women think that penises should be bigger, but there's lots of women that don't like that. And there's lots of, I embarrassed to say, I joined TikTok recently for reasons. And there's this whole side of TikTok that is young men talking about how they actually like things like stretch marks and bellies and gaps between the teeth and all the stuff that women are taught that are ugly and get fixed. And men are going, oh, no, it's fucking awesome. I love that, you know. So there's not a right way to have a body, but we live in a world that shames us, not just for having the wrong body, but having a body at all, you know. And it starts as soon as your parent changes your nappy and they make a face at the smell. What are we learning? Right? They look at your body and go, oh, I did it as a parent, you know, I didn't know any different. And that's the first thing we get, you know, we get popped out, they slap a nappy on it or diaper on us, cover us up and make a face. Right? And then we get taught things like, you know, because kids will explore their body. But they get shouted at for doing that. You know, I think when we spoke before, Lauren, you gave us an example of that. Kids will innocently explore their body. We're naturally sensual beings, you know, but they get shamed for it. They get shouted at it. Even things like, you know, natural body things that we do in the toilet, we get shamed. Don't do that here, or, oh, it smells, or shut the door, do it behind a closed door, you know, which is fair enough, you know, but also there's a sense of shame in it, you know, and then there's putting on weight or like I said before, having stretch marks or scars, or we all do. You don't get through life without some of that stuff. It's what gives us character. If you think like you said before about in the movies, that's what makes people interesting. You know, otherwise it's just like a carbon copy of a Barbie doll. You know, it's not interesting.
Which is what you see
for everyone else and not for me, myself to have, right?
Yeah.
There's
that's what you see on programs like Botched, you know, where, I mean, the guys, the surgeons there, the cosmetic surgeons are lovely people, and they usually only take on real cases that have been botched. But some of the characters that walk in there and want a designer vagina, they want a bigger bum, they want even bigger boobs. And it's almost like, it makes me think, why do people crave the opportunity not to just be themselves and be content with that and work with their body, work with what you've got? Sure, you know, if you had third-degree burns and you need cosmetic surgery, great. But I mean, some of these people coming in were like wanting to be like cartoon characters. They've got this distorted image of what their body should look like and how they present that to the world.
But if you look at the culture we're being brought up in, if you look at music and films and television and all of that that are telling young people and some older people, this is the acceptable body. I mean, the amount of fat shaming that happens in television and films is shocking. It's that even when they're trying to be PC with it, you know, Hollywood is terrible for fat shaming. It is not okay. You are a lesser of a person. You know, it's shocking to me. And so, you know, if maybe you're brought up in a household that values skinny or values teeth a certain way or values bums a certain size or whatever it is, if you grow up in a society that's telling you you're more valuable if you look this way, and then a family that's also doing that, and we're past many, unless you get really conscious about it, your parents are passing down what their parents to them. My two grandmothers grew up at a time where a woman needed a man because they weren't supposed to work, right? So you needed a husband at the time. And what they were taught was the only way to get a husband was to be skinny and attractive. So both my grandmothers had what I would now call eating disorders. It wasn't seen as that back then. They were trying to keep themselves attractive for their man. But they passed that on to my parents. And my parents passed it on to me and my sister. My sister went, you know what? We're chubby. Like, this is my natural body shape. I'm not going to starve myself so some man can take care of me. I'll take care of myself, you know? But when the culture only 2 generations ago was in America, women couldn't get her own credit card until like 1975. She couldn't sign her own mortgage lease. And like, so there's a lot of systems in there that were very broken, and that all feeds in. There's a great book, which I have to admit, I haven't read all of it because I found it so devastating. I only read like the first part of it, which was enough, called Fat is a Feminist Issue. And when first someone told me about that book, I was like, oh no, I don't want to read that book. They were like, just fucking read it. I was like, all right. So I started reading just like the intro of it in the first chapter, and it's fucking devastating because what they're saying is all this stuff, women were more seen as kind of a trophy thing. They couldn't survive on their own because of the structures that were in place. They didn't have any rights. And so they were set against each other to try and get the top male to breed. There's no real human in that. There's no presence in that. There's no authenticity in that. But that's what our culture is coming out of. I mean, in the Renaissance days, my body was like the desired body, but then cultural norms shifted. The funny thing is, my body's still desired by people who desire this kind of body. If I didn't have self-awareness, I would feel that I was wrong or bad or not desirable or unvaluable or whatever. I had to do a lot of work to go, yeah, no, I'm a chubby girl. That's just who I am. It's in my genes. My grandmother, one of my grandmothers, apologized to me once and said, I'm really sorry, Rebecca, but you're going to have big boobs, big thighs, and a big ass because you're one of us. Not, isn't it great that you're going to have these curves? Exactly. I'm really sorry. I'm apologizing to you for the way you're going to look.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah.
So in that book, they break down all the structures and that hold beauty standards in place that are, it's all arbitrary and bullshit. But then feeds into shame and fear and guilt and all of that, which keeps us shut down. And if you want to get really deep, I reckon there's a whole rabbit hole I won't go down, but I think that's been put into place somewhere along the way on purpose to take away our power. Because when we really know ourselves, right? When we really know ourselves, when we're connected to our heart, when we're connected to our felt sense of knowing, when we're connected to our body, when we're connected to our sexual energy without shame, we're fucking powerful.
Right.
But we're much easier to control as a mass if they take that all away. And you can't cut off people's genitals. They mutilate them, but you can't take them off. So what can you do? Shame them.
Right.
Let's just shame you from the neck down. Felt sense of knowing isn't something. You have to use your mind. Anything from here down is bullshit, not valuable, right? So if you have a gut sense of something, that doesn't count. You have arousal, that's embarrassing. You feel something, oh, how embarrassing for you. So we've been cut off from the neck down, every gender. Women are allowed to feel a little bit, but men aren't, right?
I'm a very sensitive person and I feel a lot. I'm very sensitive to things. And, things like arousal, for me, can happen like that. Because whether it's a photograph or a beautiful woman or a flower or, I can feel that arousal in me. And when I was younger, it was a bit like, oh, gosh, I shouldn't be feeling that. And then you dumb down your full expression. You dumb down all those things. And then you buy into this whole narrative of boys don't cry and boys don't feel. And like you're saying, it's like just neck up. And so you go on this exploration. Mine was women's catalogs and Hustler and all the rest of it, and going, so where do you apply a little rotation? Oh, is it, it's almost like do it by numbers. It was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But the problem with that is the lowest common factor of that is it can lead you down a very slippery slope into some kind of weird sort of perversity, or at its highest common factor, you can have full genetic and sexual expression and gender expression. And I feel that we have to reframe the narrative here. And like you were saying earlier, Rebecca, the foundational aspects needs to be taught in schools.
It has to. Yeah. I mean, because once you hit what we call here middle school, watch out. It's already been established, the good, the bad. It's that imprint of who they think their sexuality is. And it's either you have to do a lot of work to strip back down, or if it was done in a healthy manner, then they have the freedom of expression without all of these barriers of the shame and the guilt. Yes, to which I grew up in the era, as you were mentioning earlier in our last conversation, is that, yeah, I remember very clearly. I mean, that is a vivid memory. And I think I had to have been maybe 4, and we were playing doctor. And I mean, it was like we just had murdered someone. And so that does last. And then it flips you to where you are always questioning, like, ooh, am I doing something nasty? Because she called it nasty. My mother would call it nasty. And you hear people say, oh, are you doing the nasty? As you're growing up in those, at least that was a word that I was like, so you now in adulthood, you're going, that is far from nasty. It is beautiful. Where the hell did we get that? But psychologically, it's so buried and it's so deep in there that in that act, it can come out very quickly of going, oh, am I being nasty? Is it wrong? So yeah, I mean, it definitely takes work. I mean, I've personally can share, I had to do a lot of work to open up my full expression. And it's a beautiful thing when you do. Yeah.
Well, it sees your subconscious, it gets encoded into your subconscious, and that starts to run the show. And that's the issue, because you're not present, you're not conscious of it. That's why I'm saying you have to move from being self-conscious to conscious of self. And one of the things, because I'm just looking at the time here as well, but one of the things I'd like to ask you is about cultures, because I've been to the Middle East, I've stayed in the Middle East, I've been into Africa, and in certain places, there are women breastfeeding, no one's kind of going, gawping and gaping at them. It's just a natural expression of what they do. Whereas if someone's breastfeeding on a tube here, it's a bit like, oh my gosh.
That's because in the West, we automatically assume a body is sexual. We sexualize a body.
Right.
Right. Body is sexuality might be innately in it, but a body itself isn't innately sexual. If I'm walking down the street naked and people are going and ogling because they've sexualized me, they're only seeing me as a sexual thing. Whereas my child and some guy is salivating over that, it's because he's sexualized it.
Because I've also noticed that years and years ago, when I used to live in London and I used to go out a lot, and I was with a girlfriend, and when I was with that person, when I was with that lady, I was with that lady. Right. So I was totally present to her. But sometimes I'd be very aware of other people on other tables. And I would look at some of the men, and you could see that, like, a beautiful woman would walk by. She looked incredible, very sexy, but they would be undressing them with their eyes. Mm-hmm. They start to sexualize them. And you get the narrative of the men going, oh, I'll fuck anything with a pulse, and that kind of stupid narrative that some men have. The lowest common fact is sexualizing children.
Mm.
That's
a deviation, isn't it?
That's a deviation, exactly.
Rebecca, firstly, how can our listeners reach you? And we can refresh maybe some activities that they could do, or something that could help our listeners to build a better relationship with their sexual identity.
Okay, big questions. In terms of finding me, I am Rebecca Lowrie or Sexual Alchemy pretty much everywhere. The website, you can find me. The same website is RebeccaLowrie.com or sexualalchemy.com. Both go to the same place. And across social media, it's Sexual Alchemy or Rebecca Lowrie. And I'm everywhere these days. And in terms of what people can do now, gosh, okay. So many things come to mind. Let me see if I can be succinct. One is to start to tune in to yourself, tune into your body as a whole, tune into your genitals, tune into other parts of your body, and get to know them. What do you like? What's working for you? What's not working for you? What messages do you have for me? Mm-hmm. What are you holding on to that maybe we need to let go? What messages have I given you that I need to change? That kind of thing. Get to know their own body, get to know how breathing can move sexual energy through their body. If they know that there are or trauma or things that they're holding on to, get some help, whether that's counseling or coaching or something specific to sexuality, help or training or something, get help. There's a lot of this stuff we do need help with. There's a lot we can do for ourselves, and there's a lot where we need someone holding space for us.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's not bad or wrong. That's how we are as humans. And just be open to there being more than what you were taught. And when you come into being sexual, either with yourself or with a partner or partners, can you be present in the moment, present with each other, and see what unfolds instead of having a preconceived idea about what wants to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So if people want to find you, it's sexualalchemy.com.
Yeah.
And do you work with people virtually as well?
I do, yeah. So I prefer in person where it's possible, but I work with people over Zoom all the time. Sometimes it's more like sex coaching, although I'm not a coach, but helping them with issues. Usually I'm doing some sort of energy work because energy's energy. You don't have to be in the same room. I teach people how to lots of things, but yes, I can work virtually.
Excellent.
Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on. And I can feel this is just the tip of the iceberg, because I can feel there's so much more to unpack in and around this subject. It's encyclopedic.
And every subject has a lot of things to unpack, But thank you for having me. I could talk to you guys for hours.
I know, the same. So that's why we'll have to get back on again and carry on with more conversation with Rebecca. So thank you so much for joining us.